there is a long history behind the risk management framework, and it's actually been updated and changed multiple times. When I entered what I consider the compliance side of cybersecurity, there was something called GISRA, and that was the Government Information Security Management Act. And that we had 800, NIST special publication 826, and then we went to something called FISMA, and that was the Federal Information Security Management Act. And then in 2014, it became the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. And the reason I tell you that background is because it's been this progression to where we used to do, I'll call it worksheet compliance. You know, Eric, do you have security? Yes or no? To now we have this process around risk management, and that's where the risk management framework comes in place, where you might be building, I worked at the FAA for a long time, and you might be building a lighting system for airplanes to land, right? And the security says that after 10 minutes of inactivity, they lock out. You're not going to lock out emergency lights on an airport unless you're doing the old compliance process. So you need risk management. You still need them to be secure, but you need to manage the risk. And so the risk management framework is actually now a 7-step process. It was a 6-step before, but they've added a step called prepare, which makes a lot of sense. And it's based on NIST Special Publication 837. And that tells you basically the roles and responsibility, how to implement the 7 steps. And also, just as important, what are the other publications that support the risk management framework? So, for example, we start with prepare. And prepare really means scoping the system. So how do we, first of all, what is the mission of the system? What's the description of the system? And then we have to categorize it. And categorization is a word for security objectives. And in security, we have 3 objectives. We have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so in the risk management framework, what we do is we actually take those 3 security objectives and we decide, is it high, moderate, or low? So if, for example, in Motorola, we do public safety. We absolutely focus on the availability. We know that when someone pushes to talk on one of our radios or one of our networks, they absolutely need it to be available. So we focus highly in that area. So for us, availability is a high. And we might have sensitive networks, so confidentiality might be high. And we want to make sure that that message is the exact message that's sent, gets to the user, so we might say it's high. But the categorization goes low, moderate, or high, so based on the security objectives. And then after you know that, that's step 1, and we go into categorization. Step 0 is prepare, and then 1 is categorization. We take all the things we know about our data, our system, and we set it to low, moderate, high. And that's all categorization is. It's like, what are your security objectives? Then you select the controls. That's step 2. And all that is since you said your confidentiality is low, moderate, or high, your integrity and availability, you have a set of baseline security controls, and then you have a mission. Let's go back to FAA, right? We have national airspace and we have non-NAS, which is non-national airspace. And in NASA, we have, human space flight and non-human space flight. And those have different requirements around the data we process, store, transmit, manage, and review, but they also have additional controls. We talked about FedRAMP. There's a tailoring process in FedRAMP. So if you have an infrastructure, a platform, or software as a service, you have a hypervisor, so you have to do some special things around that hypervisor to secure that data. It's the same thing. So when you're selecting controls, you get a baseline, and then you tailor those controls to your mission, to your organization's requirements, and a lot of times to the threat environment. And then the next thing you do after you've selected those controls in the RMF is you implement the controls, right? So we selected them. Now we need to take everything that we said was in that prepare step, everything that was in scope of the system. We call it our authorization boundary. In every single one of those components, the people, the process, and technology, all these controls have to be integrated. And so that's really the longer process. And then once we're done, we think all those security and privacy controls are in place and work as intended. We do the next step, which is assess. And so this is where we have an independent assessor come in and say, this is what you said you have. here's your security objectives, and here's all the controls that are in place working as intended and the ones that are not. So we go through that, and after assessment, we have to go and get what's called authorize. And so we have this AO, which is an authorizing authority, and a lot of times we have a risk executive, and those, either the individual or two individuals, have to make a risk-based decision. And this once goes back to risk management framework. They're looking at their mission, and they're looking at the system and how important it is, and they're deciding, should this get an ATO, an authority to operate, or a DATO, a denial authority to operate? Because if it's bringing too much risk into our environment, they're going to make the DATO decision because they don't want to bring any undue risk into their mission area. And there's other types of authorizations. There's IATT, interim authority to test. So you're bringing a new system in, but it's not really ready for production, but you're going to use production data. So you have a fixed time to do that. And then you're not even done that. After that risk decision is made, you go into continuous monitoring. And this is now where the environment changes, the data changes. You're constantly watching all those controls you put in place through that entire 7-step process. And if something changes, it's going to require you to go back through the prepare again. Oh, you added a bunch of new infrastructure. You got to categorize again. You have to select. You have to implement again. You need to assess, authorize, and then continuous monitor. So it's this circular pattern based on both risk, mission, threat, and environment. And that's what the risk management framework is, a framework to make those risk-based decisions.